Section 1 of Essays, Book 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. Essays, Book 1, by Michel de Montaigne. Translated by Ch.1. That men by various ways arrive at the same end. The most usual way of appeasing the indignation of such as we have any way offended, when we see them in possession of the power of revenge, and find that we absolutely lie at their mercy, is by submission to move them to commiseration and pity. And yet bravery, constancy, and resolution, however quite contrary means, have sometimes served to produce the same effect. Edward, Prince of Wales, Edward the Black Prince, the same who so long governed our Guyenne, a personage whose condition and fortune have in them a great deal of the most notable and most considerable parts of grandeur, having been highly incensed by the Limousins, and taking their city by assault, was not, either by the cries of the people, or the prayers and tears of the women and children, abandoned to slaughter and prostrate at his feet for mercy, to be stayed from prosecuting his revenge, till, penetrating further into the town, he at last took notice of 3 French gentlemen, who with incredible bravery alone sustained the power of his victorious army. Then it was that consideration and respect unto so remarkable a valour first stopped the torrent of his fury, and that his clemency, beginning with these 3 cavaliers, was afterwards extended to all the remaining inhabitants of the city. Scanderbeg, Prince of Epirus, pursuing one of his soldiers with purpose to kill him, the soldier, having in vain tried by all the ways of humility and supplication to appease him, resolved as his last refuge to face about and await him sword in hand; which behaviour of his gave a sudden stop to his captain's fury, who, foreseeing him assume so notable a resolution, received him into grace. An example, however, that might suffer another interpretation, with such as have not read of the prodigious force and valour of that prince. The Emperor Conrad III, having besieged Guelf, Duke of Bavaria, would not be prevailed upon, what mean and unmanly satisfactions soever were tendered to him, to condescend to milder conditions than that the ladies and gentlewomen only, who were in the town with the Duke, might go out, without violation of their honour, on foot, and with so much only as they could carry about them. Whereupon they, out of magnanimity of heart, presently contrived to carry out upon their shoulders their husbands and children, and the Duke himself; a sight at which the Emperor was so pleased, that, ravished with the generosity of the action, he wept for joy, and immediately extinguishing in his heart the mortal and capital hatred he had conceived against this Duke, he from that time forward treated him and his with all humanity. The one and the other of these 2 ways would with great facility work upon my nature, for I have a marvellous propensity to mercy and mildness, and to such a degree that I fancy of the 2 I should sooner surrender my anger to compassion than to esteem. And yet pity is reputed a vice among the Stoics. who will that we succour the afflicted, but not that we should be so affected with their sufferings as to suffer with them. I conceived these examples not ill suited to the question in hand, and the rather because therein we observe these great souls, assaulted and tried by these two several ways, to resist the one without relenting, and to be shook and subjected by the other. It may be true that to suffer a man's heart to be totally subdued by compassion may be imputed to facility, effeminacy, and over tenderness. Whence it comes to pass that the weaker natures, as of women, children, and the common sort of people, are the most subject to it. But after having resisted and disdained the power of groans and tears, to yield to the sole reverence of the sacred image of valour, this can be no other than the effect of a strong and inflexible soul enamoured of and honouring masculine and obstinate courage. Nevertheless, astonishment and admiration may in less generous minds beget a like effect. Witness the people of Thebes, who having put two of their generals upon trial for their lives, for having continued in arms beyond the precise term of their commission, very hardly pardoned Pelopidas, who, bowing under the weight of so dangerous an accusation, made no manner of defence for himself, nor produced other arguments than prayers and supplications. Whereas, on the contrary, Epaminondas, falling to recount magniloquently the exploits he had performed in their service, and after a haughty and arrogant manner, reproaching them with ingratitude and injustice, they had not the heart to proceed any further in his trial, but broke up the court and departed, the whole assembly highly commending the high courage of this personage. Note Plutarch, How far a man may praise himself, chapter 5. Dionysius the elder, after having by a tedious siege, and through exceeding great difficulties, taken the city of Reggio, and in it the governor Phaeton, a very gallant man who had made so obstinate a defence, was resolved to make him a tragical example of his revenge, in order whereunto he first told him that he had the day before caused his son and all his kindred to be drowned. To which Phaeton returned no other answer but this, that they were then by one day happier than he. After which, causing him to be stripped, and delivering him into the hands of the tormentors, he was by them not only dragged through the streets of the town, and most ignominiously and cruelly whipped, but moreover vilified with most bitter and contumelious language, yet still he maintained his courage entire all the way, with a strong voice and undaunted countenance, proclaiming the honourable and glorious cause of his death, namely, for that he would not deliver up his country into the hands of a tyrant, at the same time denouncing against him a speedy chastisement from the offended gods. At which Dionysius, reading in his soldiers' looks that instead of being incensed at the haughty language of this conquered enemy, to the contempt of their captain and his triumph, they were not only struck with admiration of so rare a virtue, but moreover inclined to mutiny, and were even ready to rescue the prisoner out of the hangman's hands, he caused the torturing to cease, and afterwards privately caused him to be thrown into the sea. Man, in good earnest, is a marvellous vain, fickle, and unstable subject, and on whom it is very hard to form any certain and uniform judgment. For Pompey could pardon the whole city of the Mamertines, though furiously incensed against it, upon the single account of the virtue and magnanimity of one citizen, Zeno. Plutarch calls him Stheno, and also Sthemnos and Sthenis, who took the fault of the public wholly upon himself, neither entreated other favour, but alone to undergo the punishment for all. And yet Sylla's host, having in the city of Perugia Plutarch says Praeneste, a town of Latium, manifested the same virtue, obtained nothing by it either for himself or his fellow citizens. And directly contrary to my first examples, the bravest of all men, and who was reputed so gracious to all those he overcame, Alexander, having after many great difficulties forced the city of Gaza, and entering found Betis, who commanded there, and of whose valour in the time of this siege he had most marvellous manifest proof, alone, forsaken by all his soldiers, his armour hacked and hewed to pieces, covered all over with blood and wounds, and yet still fighting in the crowd of a number of Macedonians, who were laying on him on all sides, he said to him, nettled at so dear bought a victory, for in addition to the other damage, he had 2 wounds newly received in his own person, "Thou shalt not die, Betis, as thou dost intend. Be sure thou shalt suffer all the torments that can be inflicted on a captive." To which menace the other returning no other answer, but only a fierce and disdainful look. "What," says Alexander, observing his haughty and obstinate silence, "is he too stiff to bend a knee? Is he too proud to utter one suppliant word? Truly, I will conquer this silence, and if I cannot force a word from his mouth, I will at least extract a groan from his heart." And thereupon, converting his anger into fury, presently commanded his heels to be bored through, causing him alive to be dragged, mangled, and dismembered at a cart's tail. Quintus Curtius, Book 4, Chapter 6. This act of cruelty has been doubted, notwithstanding the statement of Curtius. Was it that the height of courage was so natural and familiar to this conqueror, that because he could not admire, he respected it the less? Or was it that he conceived valour to be a virtue so peculiar to himself, that his pride could not, without envy, endure it in another? Or was it that the natural impetuosity of his fury was incapable of opposition? Certainly, had it been capable of moderation, it is to be believed that in the sack and desolation of Thebes, to see so many valiant men lost and totally destitute of any further defence, cruelly massacred before his eyes, would have appeased it, where there were above 6,000 put to the sword, of whom not one was seen to fly, or heard to cry out for quarter, but on the contrary, every one running here and there to seek out and to provoke the victorious enemy to help them to an honourable end. Not one was seen who, however weakened with wounds, did not in his last gasp yet endeavour to revenge himself, and with all the arms of a brave despair, to sweeten his own death in the death of an enemy. Yet did their valour create no pity, and the length of one day was not enough to satiate the thirst of the conqueror's revenge, but the slaughter continued to the last drop of blood that was capable of being shed, and stopped not till it met with none but unarmed persons, old men, women, and children, of them to carry away to the number of 30,000 slaves. Section 2.